Happy Saturday. Good start to a Memorial Day weekend. My name is Mark Allison. I'm the Executive Director of New Mexico Wild. Thanks for being here. We're kind of short on time. I think we're going to try to keep this to 30 minutes or so. We may run over a little bit if the Senator has time, but I know he has obligations. So I thought we would really just go ahead and jump in. But we're here to learn more about the recently introduced legislation to permanently protect the Gila River, and really to celebrate reaching this major milestone with friends and all the supporters. So thanks again, Senator Heinrich, for making time for this virtual town hall today. We do have some special guests too. I'll do some more formal introductions later, but we're joined by Alethea Edwards, Francis Vasquez, Jamie Crockett, and David Morroc, and I'll say just a bit more about them later, as I said. We're also going to try to reserve a few minutes at the end for some Q&A. So with that, let me introduce the Senator. I think everybody on this call really knows about his commitment to public lands and his conservation credentials. I do like to note that he isn't a legislator that needs to be convinced or persuaded of the value of public lands, but rather he's a conservationist who became a legislator in no small part because of this commitment, and that really makes all the difference. So thanks again, Senator. I thought we could start with any opening remarks that you'd like, and then maybe you could tell us a little bit about why this bill is named the MH Dutch Salmon Greater Gila Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And I don't know if you could tell us any stories about Dutch personally, but the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mark. And this is kind of the culmination of years and years of work of so many people in the community who have spent thousands of hours really going out and inventorying different stretches of the watershed, and who've been over the years realizing just what a unique and special resource the Upper Gila watershed is. In 1968, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was passed, and I think it was passed largely in reaction to how voraciously and how quickly rivers were being diverted, they were being dammed, they were being modified, rip-wrapped. Just their nature was changing so quickly all across the country that people realized that we should find those best examples of reaches of rivers that are in their more natural condition and protect those. And that's certainly been done in New Mexico for a number of stretches of river on the Chama and the Pecos and on the Rio Grande. But to me, the place I think of that is the most wild and scenic really is the Gila, because it has such a uniquely natural hydrograph. Its hydrology is just so variable, ranging from 30 cubic feet per second in the middle of a drought in July, early July, to like these huge flows of 18,000 cubic feet per second. And what that has done is really kept it in a condition that you just don't see other places. It's also the southernmost snow-fed river in North America. And so you have this watershed that starts up at 11,000 foot peaks like Whitewater Baldy and works its way down into these desert riparian gallery forests full of neotropical birds that you don't see anywhere north of the Gila. So it's a really special resource. It's really close to so many people who have sort of created their lives around it. And one of those was Dutch salmon. When I think about why we can entertain the idea of wild and scenic, why the Gila is not already modified or dammed, and the Hooker Dam proposals and so many others, I can't think about that and not think about Dutch salmon. Longtime community member, absolutely passionate about protecting the Gila, but at the same time had a way about him that really respected everyone's point of view, and he could have a conversation with anyone really. And a great writer, somebody who told the story of the Gila over and over again, a great sportsman, really dedicated his life to protecting his favorite fishing hole, as he said.
Are you concerned that people are going to think that there's in the Gila?
That there's what in the Gila?
Salmon.
Oh, well, if they think there's salmon in the Gila, they will be disappointed. But if they're looking for smaller related species, they might get excited about the Gila trout. A lot of people sure do.
So I know you know the Gila personally and intimately. Do you want to share kind of any favorite stories or memories of some experiences you've had in the Gila?
You know, one of the formative experiences for me quite a long time ago, before I entertained the idea of running for public office, I backpacked into Turkey Feather Pass and some of the areas in the upper part of the Gila watershed, sort of in the Ponderosa Pine mesas up there. And it was during a fire. And it was the first time that I saw a Ponderosa pine forest and realized what a Ponderosa pine forest was supposed to look like. These high mesas, places like McKenna Park and Turkey Feather Pass, Jackass Flats, had never really seen a saw, had never seen fire suppression, and you just had these giant fire-scarred 350-year-old trees with a sea of grass in between them. And I was in there at a time when a fire had started, and unlike the fires you often see on the TV news at night, with huge numbers of blackened acres, and this fire was just creeping along the forest floor, cleaning up the grass and the leaf litter and the stuff close to the ground, and it was maintaining that open, spacious, healthy Ponderosa pine forest. And it really made me realize, you know, much of what I had seen across New Mexico and across the West really was in a completely different condition than it would have been 500 years ago. And the Upper Gila was one of these places where that wasn't the case. And it really got me interested in the Gila. I did a 53-mile backpack with a buddy through the Upper Gila when I was deciding whether or not to run for city council in Albuquerque. And this was right after 9/11, and it was a really formative experience as well. So it's just a place I go back to for inspiration and to reconnect with something real and unchanged in many ways.
It just must be incredibly gratifying to have been in the Gila when you made your decision to participate in public office and public service, and then now, not that too many years later, you're in a position where you can be able to introduce legislation like this with Senator Udall.
Yeah, but I think it's in large part less about me and more a reflection of just how the community has come together and realized how unique the Gila is, and that it's something worth protecting, and that it's something that people, when they find out about it, will want to know more about, to see, to visit. And I think that recognition has grown so dramatically because of the Gila River Festival and because of all the voices who've worked on this over the years. That's really what makes this moment in time possible.
Can you say more about that? Like, what goes into this moment and drafting and introducing legislation? And, you know, the folks on this call are all supporters. We're all involved in the effort in big ways and small ways over many years. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the importance of that kind of grassroots advocacy and the community support to your job?
You bet. It's absolutely essential. There are a million reasons not to do things in Washington, D.C., and someone's always looking to put up a check gate that says no. And when you have such a strong a community-based coalition, it makes the federal piece that I work on so much easier and so much more likely to be successful. So when you have those local business stories, when you have people who have dedicated their lives to going out and surveying these stream segments, knowing exactly what's on the ground, uh, sort of deconflicting, making sure we know where existing infrastructure is, existing access is, so that we're not, that what we intend to do in legislation matches up to what's actually on the ground. That solves a lot of problems right out of the gate, because then you're not fighting over a conflict that you didn't mean to create in the first place. So all of those pieces, when you add them up, it adds up to tens of thousands of hours of people's lives dedicated to making something like this possible. And you just can't replace that, that sort of grassroots infusion of knowledge with anything else.
Excellent, thank you. Can you, I mean, I think the folks on this call obviously are very excited and appreciative. It's kind of been in this real bright spot in all of this. The timing of introducing the bill, you know, at this moment during this time.
Absolutely. If you're like me, and I've heard this from a lot of people around the state, unfortunately, mostly over Zoom calls, but you know, throughout the last 2.5 months, if I hadn't had the ability to get outside on our public lands, I just don't know what I would have done. It was so important to me before, but even more so now. And it really brought home how central to the physical and mental well-being of most New Mexicans these accessible open spaces are, and why in the midst of a pandemic, they're really even more important. And it occurred to me, we were wrapping up the final details that we were working through, wanting to get the details right. And I just really felt that we needed to introduce it now to give people hope and to give people something to look forward to work towards, that wasn't, what we hear about every day with trying to homeschool our kids and go to the grocery store with a mask on and all the other things that we have to do right now to meet this moment of the pandemic. It's also important to realize, we will get through this, and what kind of nation, what kind of state do we want for ourselves on the other side of this crisis, and work towards that at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you. So let me pause here for a second and say, if folks do have questions, you can go ahead and enter those in at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to those at the end. But if it's okay, Martin, what I thought we could do is hear from some of the local voices for a few minutes. We're going to try to keep people to around 3 minutes a piece or so. But I thought I would start with Alethea Edwards. She's a Grant County Commissioner in a program for this weekend. She's a Navy veteran. She's a social justice advocate and an avid outdoor recreationist. She was an early and steadfast supporter of the Wild and Scenic effort. And Commissioner, do you want to say a few words about kind of what the Gila means to you, or anything for the attendees?
Well, I didn't want to waste any of my 3 minutes by rambling on, so I actually prepared something that I'd like to read, if that's okay. And in keeping with this weekend, etc., in any given year, nearly 8 million people in the United States suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. Can be the result of any physical or psychological trauma, being the sufferer or witnessing rape, assault, serious injury, violence, abuse, war, or any other traumatizing event can cause PTSD symptoms to occur periodically or often for the rest of one's life. Up to 25% of war veterans from Vietnam, the Gulf, Iraq, and Afghanistan have needed or will need some form of psychological care for the delayed effects of combat exposure. For veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, chronic pain continues to be one of the most frequently reported symptoms, and up to 35% of patients with chronic pain also have PTSD. Over 75% of veterans suffering from PTSD also have substance abuse, depression, and chronic illness comorbidities. And I think that's really particularly important to think about here in this state, given the incredible number of people who have served from New Mexico. One only has to experience for oneself the incredible healing properties of the solitude, beauty, and diversity of our wild places to understand how important they are to people who are suffering from PTSD. Collectively, we are all suffering the effects of our inherently chaotic and violent world. The noise, the speed at which everything happens, our rapidly changing planet, the uncertainty of our economic future, all cause what I believe to be a form of collective PTSD. I also believe our capacity to face the future is directly connected to our access to protected wild places. Preserving our rivers, oceans, forests, deserts, and beaches, as well as the flora and fauna within, is directly connected to our survival on this planet. Legislation like the Dutch Salmon Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is critical to a healthy future. I am so thankful for people like Senator Heinrich, Senator Udall, and the hundreds and hundreds of other people who have worked so hard to get us to this point of introducing wild and scenic designation and protection for our Gila River. One does not have to look far to understand the forces that would turn every bit of our public lands into profit-making machines that are working at warp speed to make it so. We have a moral, ethical, and personal obligation to do everything we can to stop the relentless consumption of public lands for private gain by actively participating in the process to pass legislation like the Dutch Salmon Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. So I would just close by saying this is incredibly important to the future of Grant County economically and otherwise. And I think collectively to our entire global future that we protect places like this. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that's really an important message, and we've been fortunate to have really tremendous support from veterans for this effort, and I think in large part because they recognize kind of the solace that public lands affords. Dutch actually talked about public lands and conservation in very patriotic terms and love of country in a very literal way. So thank you for those words.
Sure.
I wanted to introduce Frances Vasquez. Frances wasn't able to join us on video, but I understand she is on the phone. And she's a retired educator, a former chair of the Silver Consolidated School Board. She was chair of the Grant County Democratic Party for 2 terms and is currently chairwoman of LULAC Council 8003. Frances and LULAC have been wonderful supporters of the Wild and Scenic designation, and Frances had a really beautiful op-ed in the paper a week or so ago, right after introduction. Frances, can you hear me, and would you like to say some remarks?
She made, Frances, if you can hear us, you might have to hit unmute to be able to, for us to be able to hear you.
Good. I had it on unmute on my phone, but not on the computer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, very much for the invitation today, and thank you for the introduction. Good to see everybody today. And thank you very much to Senator Heinrich for all that he has done. I'm here today to represent not only myself, but of course, LULAC Council 8003 here in Silver City. We are the largest active LULAC Council in the state of New Mexico. And I think all of us were in the same boat. We're pretty much older members. We're made up of older people who've lived our entire lives here in Grant County, usually for multiple generations. And we have always just taken the Gila National Forest and the Gila River and the San Francisco River for granted. It was just there for us to enjoy. Never paid too much attention other than that. And then along came Wild and Scenic and the education that came with it through Senator Heinrich and Senator Udall and New Mexico Wild. And so it really piqued our interest. And we thought, wow, we've just taken it for granted. It's there, we go, we use it. But wow, what are the chances that we could lose it or it would be changed? So we decided to take an interest in it and educated ourselves a little bit more. And we thought, no, we want to support this because we know how valuable it is to us. Just for pleasure. We don't necessarily think in terms of wildlife or other ecological advantages, just plain pleasure, enjoyment. And then it was brought home even more so just recently with the pandemic and the shelter in place. We have a 35-year-old granddaughter, and she has two children, 11-year-old, 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old was having a really hard time being cooped up in the house. We couldn't go to playgrounds that had playground equipment. She has a lot of energy, not a single soul her age to play with. And she would have meltdowns sometimes. But now that things have been lifted a little bit, her mom and dad took her out to the river and let her just play in that water, took the dog too. Mom and dad put their folding chairs in the water so they could watch them. And that little girl came back, and for 3 days, she was so different. It made a difference. So we can put all sort of psychological names to things, but this is just ordinary life, but real life, and it made a difference because there was nothing else. There's a couple of parks now that you can go to, but they don't have playground equipment. You can go and run around at least. But it's like the senator said, if it wasn't for this right now, that's the only outlet we have for that child right now, and how many other people are in the same boat. So we value the Gila National Forest, the Gila River, the San Francisco River. We take it for granted. When we're driving out on the roads, we look at it from a distance. Oh, that's beautiful. We've been taking it for granted all these years, for generations. But now we're more aware because of the greater attention to public information. And we're especially grateful that we've been able to have a voice in it. We're not muted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frances. I really appreciate those comments. So we also are fortunate to have Jamie Crockett with us here today. She's owner of the Gila Backcountry Services, which is an outfitter guide service based out of Gila Hot Springs. Jamie's a mom, a midwife. She's finishing her bachelor's in psychology at Western. She has a teenage daughter at Aldo Leopold, and Jamie's a governing council member there. And then she also is personally responsible for securing the endorsement of over 150 businesses in Grant County for this effort, which is just remarkable. So thanks, Jamie, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mark. And I felt lucky to be involved in this process. And like Commissioner Edwards, I wrote a prepared statement because otherwise I would just ramble a little bit. But I do want to take a moment to remember Ella, Michael, and Ella sacrifice that they made in their work to for conservation in this area. We're at the anniversary of their loss. I did not expect to tear up about that, but I just wanted to remind us that they're a big part of making this place special too.
And Jamie, I think it's appropriate. And I just want to say, for those folks who have called in today who don't know that story, 6 years ago, Ella Kirk and Michael Ball and Ella Myers, who were students at Aldo Leopold and who were studying the Gila, went down in a plane crash. And they were really dedicated to understanding this place and to protecting this place. And I know they inspire many, many people to this day. And this work is an extension of the work that they were doing at that critical moment.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Heinrich. Yep. Okay, so on to reading my statement. I'm excited about how this legislation will take an important step in protecting the Gila River, which I think everybody listening to this call cares about just as much as I do. I know that our community can expect, as a result of this legislation, big contributions to our growing ecotourism industry. And businesses like mine will be in a better position to continue to provide wild experiences in America's first wilderness. But I'm especially interested in the greater protections for the river corridors. These protections will benefit the important wildlife species that are all part of making this place special, like the Gila trout, the common black hawk, and the Mexican gray wolf, just to name a few. So the wilderness is the reason why my business and many of my colleagues' businesses exist. The wild and scenic designation will contribute positively to future economic growth of our area. For example, one possible advantage of the Act is future infrastructure support like signage and more thorough trail maintenance. Little things like those will improve access to the river for the whole community. There will be a management design process that will take into account a lot of public input. And each different designation type will have a specific criteria for management. And as part of the public, we will be contributing important information about how these areas will be maintained as a wild and scenic river. During the planning process that follows the passage of the legislation, I'd like to push for signage and trail maintenance because the designated river corridors are important ways that locals and people from all over the country access the Gila. An issue that the text of the bill addresses as being important to the community. So right now, Gila National Forest trail maintenance is inadequate at best. This eliminates access to our forest and forces individuals like myself to take time out of my life to repair and build trails as a volunteer. I want to push for a wild and scenic management plan that prioritizes access to the river by maintaining and improving the trail systems throughout the national forest. Maintained trails improve not just access for people, though. They prevent erosion, therefore stabilizing the habitat for wildlife, both near and in the river and in the areas between the different river segments. And maintained trails help protect other important aspects of the Gila, like cultural sites and areas of historic and scientific significance. The Wild and Scenic Act will help the ecosystem here flourish and provide tourism benefits and job opportunities for locals. It'll help strengthen the vital human-wilderness relationship that we are already so lucky to enjoy. And I'm so thankful to you, Senator Heinrich and Senator Udall, and both of your staff members who I know are doing a ton of work in making this bill a reality. And you guys have a ton of more work to do. So thanks for your ongoing commitment to this process. It's important.
Thanks, Jamie. And Mark, do you want to say just a word or two about the Great American Outdoors Act? Because the signage and infrastructure and trail maintenance issues that Jamie brings up is something else that NM Wild and other groups have been working on, and we're hoping to make some real progress on in the not too distant future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this is a bill, as you well know, as a sponsor and an author. I think what we're particularly hopeful about is the Land and Water Conservation Fund component of that. That was permanently reauthorized last March in the Dingle Act, which you really fought for, but it has never really been fully funded, and it goes to fund local parks like Francis was talking about, and also public lands And then I know you have really led the negotiations with your colleagues to include some funding for deferred maintenance and backlog, the kind of things that Jamie was talking about, and not just for the Park Service, but also for the Forest Service and BLM and refuges and things like that. And I understand that there is a commitment by the majority leader to bring that onto the floor of the Senate in the next work session. Thanks again in large part to your efforts, and that there is certainly no guarantee, but that there is at least a path forward. And that would be a momentous kind of generational type piece of legislation that folks have been working on for years and years. So we're excited about that possibility, and we'll be doing whatever we can to help get it through with your guidance and leadership. So thank you for that, and hopefully we'll have some more good news.
That it would be a huge accomplishment. I imagine what we could do to protect ecosystems with $900 million a year, to protect access, to find ways to open up public lands that we've lost access to over the years, and to have $10 billion to directly invest in rebuilding our infrastructure, so much of which was built during the Great Depression by the CCC and the WPA, to be able to rebuild those trails, to be able to get signage, to get those campgrounds open, to really be able to leverage these protections into economic activity as well. So these things really do go together in many, many ways.
So Martin, we're a little bit over 30 minutes. If you have 5 minutes, I think we can wrap this up quickly.
Okay.
That'd be great. I did want to acknowledge David Morroc. He's kind of on standby. He's the Senior Director for Wild and Scenic Rivers with American Rivers. He works all over the country protecting rivers and really is an expert. So he's been nice enough to be on standby today. If we have any kind of technical questions that we want to get addressed, and they've really been a true partner in this effort. And David's an avid angler too, and goes on wonderful fishing trips for steelhead. So we did get a few questions, and I do appreciate Jamie raising Michael, Ella, and Michael, Ella, Michael, and Ella. And Senator, I know that the moms actually went out to DC to meet with you and Senator Udall, really advocating for permanent protection of the river to, honor the memory of their children and that legacy. Can you just say a few more words about kind of what that meant to your thinking, and anything else you'd like to say about that?
I just think that their example is so inspirational, that they were, living in the moment in their lives, trying to both protect and understand a place that was their place, their home. And we can all learn from that. I certainly keep a picture of them in my office. Things in Washington can get discouraging at times, and I can look to that for inspiration. And I know one of the questions was about, can we expect this to pass with some of the people who are in positions of leadership right now? And I'm a huge believer in, once you create that sort of pressure from the community all the way to the federal delegation, I can't tell you when these things will move, when they'll pass, but absolutely, I do believe we will get this done, and we will protect the Gila River, and we will do it for all of those reasons, in memory of Ella and Michael and Ella, and in anticipation of future generations having that same opportunity of place.
So thank you for that. And you've talked already about the importance of kind of citizen conservationists. At this stage, can you tell us what we here in New Mexico and folks around the country can do at this point to help you get this passed?
I think continuing to mobilize, continuing to work, the more support we have from the community, the business members who've been organized, all of that work doesn't just stay static. It takes care and nurturing, making sure we still understand what's going on the ground, and then just letting all of your elected leaders, whether that's me or Senator Udall or Representative Xochitl Torres Small, or your county commissioners or your school board members, like, we're all in this together, and letting people know how you feel about this place is an important part of how we build the community around this effort that's capable of getting it done.
Thank you. Well, Senator, I just, on behalf of everybody on this call, we're just so proud to have you as a champion, and we're just eternally grateful for your continuing advocacy for the Gila River and the Gila area in general. So thank you so much for your leadership. I wanted to just thank Alethea and Francis and Jamie and David, and really everybody on this call for their contributions. I know you've got lots of things to do today around Memorial Day. So I wanted to wish everybody a good Memorial Day, and to make sure we do remember our veterans. So stay safe out there. If you are going to be recreating on public lands this weekend, please be really careful. Do know that there are fire restrictions in place. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. And thanks again, Senator, for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Senator. Thanks.
Bye-bye.